Hi, Darryl. Here's my first question. You you get to go diving a lot. You get underwater. I can't even imagine what it looks like. I'm not a great swimmer to start with. What does it look like when you're way, way down there? And what's the deepest you've ever dived?
What does it look like? Well, it definitely, obviously, it depends on the territory. I mean, some places, close your eyes. That's what it looks like. It's whatever light you bring with you. But the way I often put it is, I think it's as close as you can get to visiting another planet without leaving this one. I mean, it really, truly feels like another world. I mean, I've been to a lot of different environments. I've been very lucky. I mean, I've been to some amazing historical shipwrecks, like Chuck Lagoon. I've done some caves, which are incredible and breathtaking. And even, a shallow reef to me is like visiting another world. So it's pretty magical in my experience.
Nice. And does diving cross your professional life also, or like
No.
I know you shoot commercials and stuff like that.
Yeah, no. So my day job, I'm in the video technology world. I have a film and video background. I would describe diving more as my escape at this point in life. I've actually tried relatively hard to keep some separation.
Right. So I have a question that I wanted to ask. Like, what's down there that's not up here?
A lot, but again, to me, it's an escape. It's almost a fascination or a fixation. What's down there that's not up here? It's an entirely different universe. It's an entirely different reality. I guess that's what's down there, is a reminder that, sometimes I walk around in my daily life and I get so used to it that it's like an assumption. I'm like, this is the way the world is because this is what I see all the time. And it's nice to remember this is the way a world is, but this isn't the way the entire world is. So to me, what's down there is a reminder of, holy crap, there's a lot of different worlds out there. Let me go visit some of them.
Right. You said you mentioned that sometimes you what it's like down there is closed. Your eyes are closed. I've always the compression of water, the idea of light like piercing through water, like those gorgeous. My extent of understanding what diving is like comes through film, and this kind of idea that you go through from this light surface and down to these dark depths. You want to talk about how that transition happens, like physically, like what the impact of like on the body as well as mentally, and well, maybe even spirit. Would you consider it spiritual?
I would absolutely consider it spiritual. I mean, it's interesting because I don't think of myself as a religious person, generally speaking, and yet I feel like some of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had in my life are absolutely during diving, like the times that I felt small in like a really beautiful way, that things are just greater than myself and amazing. So if you go outside what we call the light zone, light pierces actually pretty far, but if you go deep enough or you go into what's called an overhead environment, you are now outside the light zone, which means the only light there is the light you bring with you. So wow. we bring our own lights so we can see what's going on. There's definitely a physical impact. There's definitely a mental impact. Your mental skills slow down. Sometimes when you're training and diving, they'll give you a little puzzle on the surface and they'll take you down and make you do the same puzzle again, just to prove to you your mental capacities are diminished. The drink, it's not unlike being intoxicated, and the deeper you go, the more that increases. There's different gases and ways to offset that some, but absolutely your mental capacities are decreased, and in some ways that's exciting, and in some ways that's frightening.
Oh, sure. Hey, Leyden, you want to do the introduction?
Hi there. We are Mad Creative at Ed Letterman and Leyden Lewis, and today we are joined by Darryl Goldberg, who is in the video and directing production arena. I am sure I will completely edit that, so Ed will. And so we're here talking about life lessons with Darryl, and let Darryl explain what that means a little bit later on in the podcast. But Darryl is would you consider yourself a professional diver at this point?
I'm proudly not a professional. I'm an amateur. Okay. I would consider myself a dive enthusiast, but I would not use the word professional.
What is the difference between a professional and an enthusiast as much as you've been diving?
I mean, a professional is making a living. It's getting paid.
Got it.
Yeah.
My first job ever was the only full-time job I've ever had was working at a color lab, and I used to do the printing for Al Giddings. You ever heard of him?
I'm struggling to place it. Yeah,
he was an amazing underwater photographer. He shot the James Bond movies when they had underwater, but he was an artist also, and that was incredible. And that was my first and last endeavor in full-time work.
If he did the Bond movies, he influenced me and a lot of divers. I mean, super fun.
Talk about that. What do you mean? Tell us about that. What do you? I don't have any reference points for the Bond movies and diving, so talk about it.
Oh no, there's some. I want to say it's. I'm going to mess this up. I want to get it right. Which one? Where Bond has the little stick rebreather in his mouth. He puts this like pencil in his mouth. He can breathe underwater. It's like the early days of. It's the early days of diving, and there's like no equipment. There's just like a shirtless Sean Connery, and he throws a tank on his back, and he jumps in the water. There's lots of fun stuff from a diving perspective in some of those early Bond movies where they just like they cut the guy's air tube and he drops dead in 2 seconds as if you couldn't hold your breath for 2 seconds. But I didn't unpack it that much when I was a kid, and I watched it all, and I was absolutely inspired by a lot of that stuff.
Oh, nice. So when you've been intoxicated going deep down, what's the deepest you've ever gone?
183 feet is the deepest I've been.
And how intoxicated did you get at 183 feet?
Well, part of the challenge is you don't really know. It's sort of not unlike actual alcohol. You generally think you're more sober than you really are. But they often say it's around, a martini for every 33 feet, roughly speaking. So
I love that. I'm 4 martinis in. I love that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I definitely find that I'm very giddy and happy. I've definitely had that experience. Having a great time.
So in addition, like
really, so it's a good high when you're down there.
It's a good high. I mean, I want to be like a little careful here because I don't want to. There are people that do it just for the high, and I think that's actually very dangerous. So I don't want to oversell the intoxication factor. I don't want anyone going to 183 feet who doesn't know what they're doing. Right. But it is absolutely, you feel it.
Right. The so were you like, just talk about the surface for a second. As a creative, one of the things that we talked about early, like, when we were getting ready to have you on the show is like, creatively, we all take on different forms. We have painters, we have other people, we have animation individuals. I'm a designer. I deal in the world of environments. So, and a lot of times we've, even during a ballet piece, they will try to, reconcile this idea between like this underwater environment and things like that. What attracted you to break the surface and like, just talk about like creatively, from a creative perspective, how does one go from the sand or the earth to the water? Like some more like, like how is the poetry of that? Or was it just like, I'm just going underneath. I just want to be inside, like how did you turn that into something you wanted to do? Like, or how did you act on maybe the passion of something you had seen?
So I can remember I was a little kid, maybe like 12 or 13 years old, snorkeling in Florida. There's a fairly famous statue in Key Largo. It's Christ of the Abyss. It's this underwater statue of Jesus. And I remember snorkeling around it and thinking, this is great. This is amazing. And as I was snorkeling around it, I saw divers pass below me. And I thought, I mean, this is good, but that's clearly way better. It was just very obvious to me. And then there was an IMAX movie I saw. I think it was called The Living Seas, and Sting did the soundtrack, and that like blew my mind. So I was really, and I used to watch like, National Geographic and Nova documentaries. I was really, really fascinated with the underwater world for a long time. And I had this idea in my head for a long time that I wanted to do it. And the frustration as I look back on it now is that I waited, and I always knew I wanted to do it, but I thought like, I don't know what I was waiting for. Like, I thought I was waiting for like someone to do it with me. Like I needed a partner, or I needed the courage or the circumstances or the skies to open up and go, it's time. And that never came. And I sort of woke up one day, I think I was listening to other inspiring friends who were doing exciting things. And I sort of had this like, what the fuck am I waiting for moment? you
Right.
know, and went to the dive shop and signed up for a class that day. But it always had been, and it still is, like almost like a fixation to me. Like I really am fascinated with it.
How often do you go diving?
As much as I can. I mean, I live in New York City currently, which is honestly not the best location for diving. It's seasonal here, but I am moving in part so that I can dive more frequently. That's a big motivator of why I would like to move. But I don't
Where
want
you moving to? Where's the good place you're moving to that has more diving?
I'm not 100% sure where I'm going to land, but my wife and I are going to try Southern California for a while.
Oh, nice. I
Very
did my
nice.
time in California.
Yeah, definitely better beach access than I currently have.
Yeah. And do you do other things like so wait a minute, let's just go back to what you said. You said you dropped a lot of little goodies there. Other people were doing things that seemed to be inspiring you, or they were like living their lives, and like you got motivated and you said, I need to be one of those individuals who participates in their life. You know what I mean? Like that's what I heard. I don't know if that was what you were getting at. And so like watching other people and seeing them, kind of actualize was a way for you to take action in your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I remember watching these movies and there'd be like these guys with like multiple tanks on, they had 2 tanks in the back, and I'd be like, in my head, I was like, oh, I think these guys are amazing. I can't do that. And I was watching other friends in other areas have this moment of be like, well, why not me? Actually, I don't understand, why not me? And then I kind of had that moment for myself. I'm like, why can't I be the guy with 2 tanks? I mean, like, I know I got to train and work my way to get there, but if I train and work my way to get there, why not me? And that to me is inspiring for whatever the hell you want to
do. For whatever, dance, paint, or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move a little bit away from diving. I read your bio there and online, and it said you're doing next level creativity or next generation creativity. Because I'm like as old school as they get and still surviving.
I know. Yeah. I see the celluloid film camera behind you. It's a beauty.
Yes.
I started in celluloid too. I have my last film that was actually on film came out in 2009. So yeah, no, I have a film and TV background, and now we call it next generation video. So that means lots of different things, but the video might be personalized. So you could actually literally get a video that says, hi, Ed, hi, Leyden. And your video is tailored to you. Even if we're making millions of them, it's tailored to individual. The video could be interactive. So you can actually click on it. It's kind of like gamifying the experience. The video can change in real time. Sometimes think of it almost as like a living animal based on the data that's coming in. So there's lots of things that are happening in the video space to evolve video technology. So the company I work for is at the forefront of a lot of that.
Oh, did you?
What is the?
Oh, sorry.
What does that creative process look like? Though, what is it a creative process or not a creative process of looking?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a creative process. I mean, so most of the clients are major brands, Fortune 500s. So generally speaking, they come to us with some problem they want to solve. Hey, we would like to reduce calls or increase sales, whatever it is. They have a goal, they have a pain point they're working towards. And then you sort of work backwards from the problem of trying to make sure I can find the right tool for the job and how to use it. So it's really creative problem solving, but it's video, so you still want it to be engaging and captivating. And we're all in the attention marketplace. Everyone's battling for everyone's attention. I'm on a podcast right now, so you'll soon be battling for people's attention. I'm in that battle as well professionally.
Yeah.
I know where we sort of come from is not solving the problem. It's sort of interesting is that we're not trying to solve a problem. We're just trying to be what we want to do and just sort of find the love of it and just go, which is how I've sort of done my career. Sometimes it's worked out. Sometimes it's not worked out well, but my philosophy is like, how do you do something that you love and make that work as opposed to problems? So it's really interesting to hear your different point of view on solving creative problems.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can come to this from both angles because, like, in my day job, you're right, it's a job, and then in my personal life, like I wrote a book and stuff that's very much more what you're talking about, more for myself. So I do think I do think they're both very, very creative, but kind of like the rules you have to play within are a little different. You know, if I'm working for a major brand, they have their brand guidelines. I'm not going to change their logo and their colors, right? Like there's certain rules I gotta play within, versus if I'm doing it for myself, there are no rules. But I do think, you know, to your point of, I almost think doing things for hire gets a little bit of a bad rap, and that you can bring more of yourself creatively to the table than I think people often think. I really believe that.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you. I think that you know, there is still every possibility that is not considered by the client, right? That where you inject something. I mean, Ed, you experienced that as well. I mean, you know, they say, "Oh, we want a picture of this facade from this angle," and you're like, "Well, you told me this yesterday. Well, what if you take it from just the opposite angle, right? And then capture something like a reflection of the building in another building versus taking the building itself." You know, that's the kind of business that we are in as creatives, and we're tasked with in a lot of ways.
Right. Well, what happened the other day was, what was interesting was that I was in the park and they have an owl that has escaped from Central Park Zoo, Flacco. There were 100 photographers out there. There was $1 million worth of equipment, the longest lenses I've ever seen. And everybody's aimed at Flacco. I had never heard of Flacco, but now I know everything about Flacco. His escape from Central Park Zoo. He was taken at Central Park Zoo as a young owl, and now
owling. Is that an owl?
He's an owl. He's an owl. But yeah. So what happened was they didn't think he'd survive on his own, but he's been a great hunter, been catching rats and mice all over Central Park. But my point is, everybody had their camera aimed in one direction. And my philosophy is everybody has their camera aimed in one direction. Go look the other way a little bit. And so I looked the other way and I took these amazing, I was happy with them. I sent them to Leyden. Pictures of American elms. Yeah, it's pictures of American elms. I never took a picture of the owl except on my iPhone, but I took a picture of all the photographers going like that. Right. And I took a picture of these amazing trees. And I've been in the park a million times. I never had looked at these things. And the only reason I looked at them was because everybody had their camera aimed the other way. My philosophy is look the other way.
It's great. I love that. Yeah.
Darryl, you know, I think we have, you know, in our conversations from being social, I did not know you went to film school, or I have no idea about this. You're talking about celluloid cameras now. I had no idea. But tell me a little bit about like where you're from and you know, forget about the work you do. Like you as a creative from the beginning, I had no idea. Like talk about it.
Yeah, well, it's a little full circle because I went to NYU Film. I started in 2000, and I wanted, believe it or not, at the time to make underwater documentaries. That was my dream. I grew up on like National Geographic and Nova and loved that stuff. And I got the film school and they were like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "Underwater documentaries." And they said, "There's no class for that. Do something else." Like, that's not a thing. So I wandered. I made music in my former life. I'd been in some bands, so I made some music videos because that was a way to get other people to pay for my film projects. I got some small indie labels and I did some music videos. And then it was kind of trendy to hire music video directors to direct feature films. So when I was 23, I got to make this little horror film called Unholy with Adrienne Barbeau and Nicholas Brendan.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Adrienne Barbeau, love her.
Yeah, me too. She makes fun of me in her book, but I still love her. Absolutely love Adrienne. And so I did that and I was like, okay, I directed a film. I'm set for life now, right? Like it's nothing but up from here. That turned out to apparently not be accurate. And it took me a while to get the second feature film off the ground, which was a comedy called Made for Each Other. Patrick Warburton, Chris Masterson, George Segal are in it, who I love. I did and then I produced a bunch of indie features and I published a book on filmmaking, which Focal Press put out, which was the biggest film book publisher.
Amazing.
Yeah. So the book is called First Time Filmmaker Fuck Ups. I hope I'm allowed to curse on this podcast.
You are.
One of the tags that we ticked was explicit language.
Oh, thank God. I think I've
So-
already cursed a few times. So yeah, no, I did that, and while I was trying to make my own movies that I was very passionate about, I had to pay the rent. So I was doing commercials, and I did what's called, large format media for years, and I just kind of meandered into personalized video and next generation video. It's sort of living at this marriage of where video meets technology is very interesting to me. So, it's like a lot of people's careers. I think nothing was planned. I fell into everything I did to a large degree, but I've been very lucky and I feel very grateful.
Excellent. Ed, you have anything particular that was triggered in your question? Your question for Darry?
What I found interesting that nothing was planned, which is really a great way of dealing. I'm still interested in just. You said, what was it like making a feature film?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's it like making a feature film? Wow. It's a blast. It's amazing. And it's incredibly exhausting. I mean, I was making indie, maybe it's different when you have, tens of millions of dollars, but when you're in the indie film world, you better be insanely passionate. And I was, so it was the time of my life, but if you're not insanely passionate, you're going to crash pretty hard.
Right. Me personally, I think that's with anything when you do it on your own and you do it. I mean, clearly, Leyden and I had no road. I mean, and when you have to make it up, if you're not passionate, if you're not really into this whole thing, you are just gonna and then you learn how to be bold. I mean, my issue early on was I was not bold, and my other issue was that I had no training in photography, and my stuff sucked. I just didn't realize it until I was around 30. My stuff in my 20s was I was going out there with a shitload of passion, and I didn't have the skill level.
Yeah.
I think I want to press you on that, because I think that's an important piece to talk about, because I think people assume I have to be naturally gifted and blessed to start. And I always want to be like, everyone starts out a beginner.
Bullshit. That's total bullshit.
Oh yeah.
So maybe it's worth pressing you on that one, talking about, how did you start? I mean, again, maybe it takes a little delusional confidence, to be honest, but about starting where you're at.
Well, I love that. I love that term, delusional confidence. I mean, because that's the thing that makes you get up despite not having the rent money, right?
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes I have to say, because you've written a book that is about lessons, and I think what most people will come away with when they see this kind of, let's say if it lives in that self-help world, right? Is that this is the apex, it's the end, it's the thing that, and so I was thinking last night as I was listening to one of these militarized master your mind books, I was like, holy shit, I cannot handle this. I am so not ready to master my mind right now. I just want to kind of feel my way through it. And I think that that's kind of honoring where I'm at too. What do you say to that point about, delusional confidence and failure, for a creative, right? Do you feel like you had failures, or do you feel okay, so talk about a failure.
I'll say that life has been an easy cruise, nothing to talk about. Good talking to you guys.
Now I write books and
it just went from better to better to better. That's my life story. No, of course you have incredibly painful failures and crash and burn. I mean, and there's this great concept in Buddhism of the beginner's mind, which, the concept, I think you probably know it, but it's basically if you think you're an expert, you're done learning. You've cut yourself off. I got it. I'm an expert. There's nothing more to learn. If you have the beginner's mind, then you're in the mindset to learn. So I'm very careful in the book, whatever I'm doing, to be I am not presenting myself as an expert. I'm trying to present myself as a good student. And these are just a student's notes. And I'm sure I have a lot more to learn. So it's almost I think you start out thinking you're an expert, and then the deeper you get in, to almost anything I find, maybe you start to meet the real experts and you realize where you're at. And that's very humbling, but very educational. And again, just remembering where you can't, I think once you think you're the expert, you're done. There's no more learning, right? So I'm never the expert. I'm always the student.
I don't know. I don't think Ed knows that how much I've leaned on you personally. As you happen to be a personal friend, and Ed is a personal friend. Both of you have made a large impact. You're both experts on living life to me, by the way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'll take it.
I have to give you.
If you ask my wife that, she would say I'm not an expert at living life.
Doesn't matter. I'm telling you, it's my reality. All right, and it's good to hear that. I think I really don't want to undervalue or just let our audience really understand that, we talk about this and we hear about these things about struggling and getting back up and struggling and getting back up. That's the whole game. That's the entire fucking game. And so important to just get up, learn the lesson, dust off all the irrelevant stuff and take the nuggets of knowledge and gold that you took with you to move forward,
And if it wasn't, because I know a bit of your story, Leyden, a bit of your struggles. I'm gonna ask you this very sincerely.
Sure.
If it wasn't hard, would you still want to do it?
Leyden would say yes, I think.
I don't know how else to do it. Do you know what I mean? It is so
right.
beyond me now.
I think Leyden is a little bit addicted to doing it that way. We're trying to get him out of not.
Here's my coach. My coach has arrived. My coach has arrived.
Yeah, your coach has arrived. Yeah.
Well, I think that there are patterns. I think that there are patterns, and we're all trying to break those ones that could become completely unnecessary, hold us back. But they're like friendships, these patterns. Yeah. And you have to be ready to go, bye, thank you. I would actually call it grieving the friendship that has to go, or
right.
put to bed.
And our conversations are in the context of friendship. I haven't coached Leyden for 5 years, except when he says, hey, put on your coaching hat right now.
I'm having feelings.
Right. And people tend just to go to the place that they're most comfortable at, whether, me, and it's not better. Me, I have probably an over extension of endorphin. So I go to this happy place. That's just my go-to place. But it doesn't mean it's better or worse. And even in that realm, you leave stuff on the table if you just go to one place,
What do you mean by that, Ed?
So
leave something on the table. What does that mean?
At least, sometimes you're leaving those things that are really sad and not acknowledging them or, grieving. I sometimes have a problem just acknowledging grieving things like, okay, my life's about moving on. Like, if you don't move on, you're just going to stop. And because that's, it's the life of a photographer and freelance. Sometimes when things happen that aren't so happy or involve your endorphins, they involved other things, that I will tend to just like, okay, let's grieve for 3 days. For instance, when I was paralyzed or when I had spinal meningitis, I had facial paralysis, like I grieved it for like 3 days. And it was like, okay, now we're moving on.
But you thought you grieved it for 3 days. Is that what you're trying to tell us? Or
exactly. You were like, I thought I grieved it.
Right.
And then it comes back, then it comes back years later when you actually get a chance to grieve it. So being in this happy zone all the time, what I leave on the table is sometimes just authenticity of grieving.
Yeah.
Grieving in a way that lets me get complete about it.
Yeah, we talk about that. We talked about that in our conversations about getting complete on something where complete is not the end of something. Getting complete is it's just it's fully fleshed out and understood within the body and the spirit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you often find little. I know I often find. I cleaned out a storage locker last night, and I found some little pools of grief that I thought I had fully processed, and it turns out they're still in there. So it's definitely not a not a straight line, but I appreciate the note of giving yourself the space to make sure you are grieving and not just saving it all for later.
Right.
But my point is, we all have this place, our natural place to go to.
Yes, absolutely.
May I say that our trained place? For me, I feel like it's a trained place.
Yeah, it's like a habit.
Natural, habits. Habits to me are trained.
But I also think you said something interesting, because you said, almost Leyden wouldn't want to do it if it wasn't hard. And that to me is like someone who, and I relate to this, by the way, your comfort zone is discomfort. Like there is a comfortable discomfort in that.
Well, we have this conversation.
Yeah.
We have this conversation.
What are you coming over here to tell the truth today or what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wanted you to like fake it until you make it.
I'm still, don't worry, we can keep going. Yeah.
No, I had this conversation with Leyden before. He said, hey, listen, there's a part of you that if it's not hard, it's not part of who, your natural way of being. So working on making it easier is not as easy, right? Would you say?
You're absolutely right. I think I get
it's out of your comfort zone. As Darryl said.
I have, listen, I grew up, I used to think that because we were fed and we went to school and our house didn't burn down, that I was from a rich family. But the fact is I grew up from a poor immigrant family. So, I think I become unfooted. I literally, like, the earth starts to feel like, what's happening? Why is there a 5-course meal being served to me? And who is this guy handing it to me? You know what I mean? So there's sometimes I have to breathe sometimes through abundance, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like, I'm not accustomed to it. I'm accustomed to doing things in a particular way, especially when being served or access to spaces. And now I navigate the interior design and architecture space, which can be kind of elitist sometimes and very caste system like, So it's a space where I've had to get comfortable at different stages of my own career, like, kind of navigating those spaces. But I do want to come back to something that I thought was interesting. We're 3 men discussing grief, and Ed would say, or did say, that it could take 3 days, spinal meningitis, I'm done. Do you think, I don't know if either of you think that that's different, because this is an opportunity to get vulnerable, like about being a man and what's necessary for a man, or what we think is necessary for a man to survive this world.
Toxic masculinity is one of my favorite topics. So absolutely. No, I think, and I haven't mastered this as well. So it's sort of like I can intellectualize it, but I don't know that I'm there. We live in a world that I think still tells men you're supposed to be the strong one and you're supposed to be tough, and it's okay to yell and scream and be violent. That's all fine, but it's not okay to cry and mourn and talk about loss. It's certainly not attractive if you like to get a partner. I have all that crap swimming around in my head. I still have trouble mourning publicly. I've gotten much better at mourning privately. That's a huge breakthrough to me. I'm not very good at doing it publicly, with other people.
My wife's sister Susie passed away about like 6 or 7 months ago. Maybe
July, right?
8 months ago. What?
July?
And what's that?
Wasn't it July?
So, what's that?
It was July, Ed, I believe. No?
July. I would say better than I do.
I think it is. Right.
Yeah. So she passed away. Well, time when you're grieving is really interesting. But my wife, Lauren, is really amazing at showing her grief. It's something she does really well. So rather than be me, which was not going to be really helpful, let's move on, honey, is I just sort of let her take the lead in grieving, and I just sort of followed. Yeah. And that's how I learned about grieving a little better. And it brought up stuff about, when I was paralyzed and, and that life was going to change forever. So I just let her lead on it. And I realized I learned so much rather than thinking I knew the answer.
Mm-hmm.
which I think I'm pretty good at doing sometimes, which really is like my fall back in life, you know.
During those deep dives, because I mean, I would love one day to say, Darryl, let's go diving, you take me along, because I would need you to take me along. Okay.
I'd love to bring you, but go on.
So like, what in those states, are you able to, did you find, I mean, we talked about intoxication, and that's one translation of it. Well, in those spaces, when you would come up against, life's creatures, an octopus, a jellyfish, a crab, a fish, a school of fish. I mean, what? I mean, like, what? I can't imagine, because I've only seen the disccusses and the National Geographics. I mean, what is that stuff like? I mean, does it feel like, you said it's like another planet, but I just want to know, like, the beauty of it. Like, could you describe like the beauty of it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky to have a few of those moments that are really, magical. I mean, I when I got into diving, I was at a really kind of low bottom of my life, and I had a very dark view of the world at the time. And I did this thing, and I remember, and I had been in this kind of really bleak abyss for a while, and I remember at the end of a dive, you have to do what's called a safety stop, where you just hang out. You just have to hold still as you come up. And I was doing that. And I had this moment as I looked around, and I was like, oh, right. Life can be amazing. I had forgotten that for a long time. I just forgotten that there was, the world I was living in just looked like shit in every direction. I was in a very dark place. And I abruptly remembered that life can be amazing. And it's probably some of the high I still chase. And I've had that moment several times in diving. There's other examples I can think of. I once saw a whale mother and calf, and like, it was a magical experience. Like, how often does that happen? I've done a few whale experiences. I've had moments in a cave where you're swimming through these cave systems, and you see a big giant rock on the ground, and you kind of realize that rock used to be on the ceiling, but thousands of years ago it fell from the ceiling to the ground. And then I have this moment of, well, that's going to happen again at some point. I'm not sure if today is the day, but one of these days it's going to happen. And if today happens to be that day, I'm done. That's it. And you remember your mortality. And I know that sounds bleak, but to me, that's inspiring. Like, there's something, this is like a very stoic concept of like, remember you're going to die. That's an inspiring thing, So I think it's a nice reminder of mortality, which I mean that in a positive way.
Yeah, of course. Mortality being
like a practice in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it's a practice.
It's very much a practice. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure. What do you mean by practice? I think I could go a few ways with that one.
Well, a practice in that, sort of like yoga is a practice in how, to make you feel better on a particular day, or, knowing that you're going to feel the best you're going to feel in life.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It's very much a mental practice. You're also like, as you get into more advanced diving, like, one of the first rules is you're not allowed to panic. You're just not allowed, because it's rarely ever the presenting problem that gets divers killed. It's panicking about the problem. So whatever, you have an air leak, you can't see, none of those things are going to kill you. Panicking about it will kill you. So you're just not allowed to panic. So you train your mind that, okay, panic's no longer an option. And once you can train yourself that way, that's like a game-changing mental state to have in or out of the water.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, when I used to work in Yosemite National Park as in a backpacking camp. And the one thing they said, when you're backpacking, if the bear comes close to you while you're putting the food up in the tree, don't run. Just don't freak out. So I'm in Yosemite. I'm like 20 years old working. And the guy who trained me we're taking 10 kids backpacking. And we're backpacking late at night because we got a little lost. And now here's a bear. I'm pushing the food up into the tree while he's pulling the rope to get it so the bear can't reach the food. And the bear is like right next to me, and I run, which they tell you don't run.
Right.
So I ran for my life, and I ran past the guy who trained me, who started running with me. And he said, "Why are you running?" He got really upset. He said, "Why are you following me?"
Yeah. You didn't finish this. Wait, did the bear catch anyone? You got to finish the end of the story.
No, the bear ripped open the bag. We chased the bear away. The bear got some food.
All right, I guess I should have.
Why do we go to these places? I mean, the question is like, why do we go to these places when there's so much danger? You know, for a kid from East New York, Brooklyn, I'm like, why do I need to be possibly attacked by a bear having a good time? You know, but I know that the Yosemite is a beautiful place. And
no, listen, I grew up in a 1,000 square foot apartment in with 5, sometimes 6 people. My grandmother used to stay with us, and so going to Yosemite was like the opposite experience. And I had never left really New York, Connecticut, New Jersey till I was 14 to go send my sister to college at Penn State. So going to Yosemite was like, oh my God,
another planet.
Yeah, it was like diving a little bit, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I know is true for myself, and I was joking about why would we go to dangerous places, or is awe. Like I remember someone asking me once in an interview, like, what about architecture? What is the feeling you get when you come in contact with great pieces of architecture? And I said, it's exactly like being at the base of a mountain. It's awe. Mm-hmm. Right? Like the greatness of something far greater than myself, and the majesty, the majestic quality of nature that's what we try to emulate in design and architecture, actually. So,
and you do a great job with that.
Thank you very much. In these, like, as we start to, Ed, if it's okay, I'm queuing to wind us down a little bit. Like, I would love for Darryl to have this opportunity to give us some key points on or lessons from
life lessons learned diving. It's called
life lessons learned diving. Like, what are like some key lessons you learned, and what's the takeaway that you'd like to highlight?
I mean, I could obviously talk about many lessons because I wrote the whole book on this topic, but let me try to pick a few. For the interest of time, I'll try to pluck out a few gems. I mean, so we talked about, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? I think that was the topic earlier that I want to talk about. Like, because a lot of times people, when you talk about diving, it scares the shit out of them. And my answer is, it's supposed to. You should be as comfortable underwater as a fish is out of water. Have you seen a fish out of water? That's right. You in the water, right? Like, it's not your natural habitat. It's not supposed to be comfortable. But if you stick with it long enough, your brain at some point kind of realizes, oh, I'm not going to die, and you get progressively more comfortable. I think that is exactly what we're talking about in our art, right? Like, get uncomfortable. At some point, you'll probably realize I'm not going to die. And you're going to have to keep pushing your discomfort point to keep growing, because what was uncomfortable yesterday is not going to be uncomfortable tomorrow. So I can keep going. Stuff like that. There's a lot of them.
Oh no!
Well, let's hear another one. That was good.
You're doing good. That was amazing.
I'm doing good. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I'm pulling it out so I can get other ones. In cave diving, you put arrows on the line, and the point of an arrow is that if you're blind and had to get your way out, you could feel where the arrow goes, and you would know which direction is home. And it is a painfully simple concept. And the way I equate this to life is, let's not confuse simple with easy. I think people often hear simple and assume that means easy. A lot of these things we're talking about are pretty simple. Stay calm, breathe, don't panic, call your mother, eat healthy, exercise. Those are all incredibly simple. None of them are easy. And I think a lot of that is really true of, like, make it as simple as you can, but don't confuse that with easy.
Yeah, right. It's sort of like, one thing I always talk about is the difference between happiness and joy. Mm-hmm. Joy isn't always easy, but happiness is like, something great happened, it was fun, you saw this. But with joy, it's the thing you love doing the most, and it's not always easy.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, I agree. I think people, this is a whole nother podcast maybe, but I think people have a very poor definition of society has like a very confused definition of happiness, for lack of a better term. It's sort of a hedonic definition. And I think it makes a lot of people miserable because they're not even aiming at a target that's going to work. And I agree, like there's better targets. Connection, purpose, meaning.
I think of Joseph Campbell and his definition of life is a series of what is his Buddhist take is life is pain with moments of bliss. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's what Joseph Campbell would say.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so here you wrote this book.
Yeah.
What were the life lessons in writing a book?
Well, that's a whole nother book, I guess. So the book started as literally notes to myself because, I love diving, and as Leyden knows, I love psychology. So it was just interesting to me when some of these concepts overlap. So I was just keeping notes for myself. But as soon as it became something that I might share with other people, that was really, really game changing. I don't feel like I have a good tight answer for this one. We might edit this one out.
Did you feel like it was a little vulnerable, like sharing? Like it's very interesting. Yes. I can feel very, 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 the word vulnerable doesn't exactly kind of aggregate or encapsulate when you put yourself out there. And I think that's so important for our audience. What was it like when it was printed, that fresh ink smell, all the words were accurate, you had vetted it and edited. How did that feel?
Yeah, so absolutely. Writing the book was extremely vulnerable. I debated putting my name on it versus doing it anonymously, to be honest, because it is so different than my professional world. And I have written other things anonymously before that I think I was at a point in my life that I was like, you know what? I'm going to put my name on it. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to put this thing out there that absolutely, scares me and terrifies me. And even this to me, like going on a podcast and talking about it is scary and terrifying. And that vulnerability became part of the point. I mean, I think we had this theme in the beginning of, the work you do for yourself and the work you do for others. I don't think it's black and white. Those are always mixed, but this is very much.
That's absolutely true. It's mixed. That's a great point. It's never just one thing.
Absolutely. But this one on the spectrum was a lot more for myself than, other people. In terms of like, it's really niche, if I wanted to make a book for money, I would have aimed for a much wider market, and this is niche. So just giving myself permission to write the book I wanted to write, knowing that my audience was probably a relatively small slice, is like a gift to myself.
Yeah. Nice. But in writing it, were you writing to get people to see if they might take up diving and learn their own lessons, or were you just writing it as a tome to the things you had gone through and just what you said, sort of deal with your vulnerability?
Yeah, I mean, again, I literally wrote it at first for myself. These were notes to myself, and then I did evolve from there. And I don't know that I wanted to convince anyone to go diving, although I would certainly love if someone told me that happened. I think I just, wanted to share these little nuggets that I thought were helpful, and I hope are helpful to others in and out of the water. I mean, some of this stuff is kind of heavy and deep. So to me, a little bit, the diving was a little bit of the sugar that can make some of the medicine go down more easily.
Mm-hmm. Well, you certainly inspired me. I think when you talk about going to another planet, I do want to just officially say I think we know a little bit more about space. If I understood the sound bites correctly, I think we might know a little bit more about our galaxy than we might know about what's happening under 2/3 of our planet. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I remember hearing and understanding. So I could only imagine the worlds that exist there in the darkness and in the light. I find it very inspiring. You've always inspired me around the diving, and I definitely do want to. I don't swim very well.
We could, but we said start where you're at. So
you got to start where you're at. So that is but interestingly enough, the surface and I'll say and I'll wrap up here. The surface for me is more scary than under it. Interestingly enough, for me personally, it's the waves. It's kind of like that in between space. Actually, if for me is it's like skimming the surface. You know, when I dive underneath in a pool, or when I have had the opportunity in the ocean, there's calm there. Up there, where the air meets the water, for me is where it's like turbulence.
I feel more calm below than I do at the surface. Absolutely.
Personally. Yeah. So I think that's something to take away for our listeners to think about.
Yeah, and I'm sure we could do another podcast just on breathing. What breathing is like under there.
Absolutely.
So we'll save that for another time, though.
Absolutely. I have one more question before we wrap up. What do you hear there?
Underwater? So yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised. It's very peaceful, but you'd hear. So if you're on scuba, you hear your own bubbles. If you're on what's called a rebreather, there are no bubbles, but you hear that. You hear nature. You can hear the boat. I've been on boats where they play music underwater. You hear a lot more than you think. There is a whole different auditory world going on.
Wow.
I
might listen to this podcast during the next dive.
Now, can you listen to a podcast underwater?
There are. I mean, I don't know that it's particularly popular in the world of diving, but there is such thing as underwater headphones. That is an option.
There is. So you could listen to the Grateful Dead or
I don't know why I thought of Enya. I don't know why I thought of Enya. What are you?
I've been on some boats, some dive boats drop an underwater speaker, and yeah, sometimes they'll play incredibly dramatic music. So, and I've had those moments. Hear it? Yeah, they'll play music underwater. The first I thought they call it narked when you're like, really out of your mind. The first time I was ever on a boat and I heard a song playing, I was like, oh no, I'm narked. And then no, the boat actually was playing music in that case. If the fish talk to you,
I want to hear psychedelic music when I'm underwater, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's doable.
Absolutely. Well, listen.
Wow, it is doable. I never knew.
We did not know that they have now gimmicked up the underwater as well. Right. Which I think that I'm going to take a puritanical approach on this. I want to hear what's down there. I'm going to say that, and I do not need to hear Beethoven or anything in order to make my underwater experience more complex than it already probably is.
So Darryl, where do we find your book? And
the book is on Amazon. You can look up Life Lessons Learned Diving on Amazon and find it there.
Excellent.
And is there any other websites you have your own personal website or?
Yeah, you can find me on lifelessonslearneddiving.com.
Okay. How about you, Leyden?
I am Leyden Lewis. I'm an interior designer, and I'm Leyden Lewis Design Studio, and you can find me on Leyden Lewis, LeydenLewis.com.
And this episode probably won't be out for a month. By then, Leyden will have been in Architectural Digest. So we're going to do an episode about that. I'm Ed Letterman. I've been a photographer. So you go to edlettermanphoto.com. That's LEDERMAN, not LETTERMAN. And you go to Ed Letterman Coaching and I only coach creatives, and it's been an amazing experience, and sort of led me to want to do the podcast. So, and the idea for the podcast came from writing down ideas every day, and this is one of the ideas that stuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anything last words? Any last word, Darryl?
No, thanks for having me on. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is great.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop recording and.
Sound editing and theme music by Will Ainsley. Brian Rzepko was basically our mentor who really taught us all the technicals, showed us how to get this online. We would not be here without Brian, so thank you, Brian. The logo is by Leyden Lewis and Sharon McLaughlin of were made in New York City. And if you're creative, we would love to hear from you. We would love to email us your story. And if we like it, we would love to have you on. We are looking for creatives to tell their story, what their challenges are, what they love about working in the creative field, what is working for them. So until next time, I hope you guys listen. This podcast is for you. Thanks.